December 17, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The morning began with silence that did not belong to winter. It was the silence of waiting, a kind of breath held by the world before it breaks. Snow fell in coarse, windless flakes, settling on dead branches and broken helmets alike. Somewhere beyond the tree line, artillery coughed in distant rhythm, a grim heartbeat echoing through the fog. The forest was swollen with shadows, and the men who held the line there were little more than ghosts in wool and steel. The Ardennes had always been a place of uneasy quiet, deep woods, narrow roads, villages tucked into valleys that swallowed sound. Now it was the site of chaos disguised as calm. American regiments, stretched thin and unprepared, huddled in foxholes and barns, unaware that an entire German army, tanks, infantry, paratroopers, was rolling toward them. It was Hitler's last gamble, a winter thrust meant to split the Allied front in two. And for 3 days, snow and cloud had grounded every Allied aircraft that might have seen it coming. High above the storm, in a sky no one could see, the 354th Fighter Group waited on standby. They were pilots of the Mustang, the P-51 long-range escort turned ground attack terror. But in those days their orders were simple: hold until visibility improves. For most it was a relief. For others it was agony. For one it would become destiny. Second Lieutenant James R. Cole was 21 years old, 2 missions into his combat tour, and already marked by the impatience of youth. He'd grown up on the Kansas plains where sky and earth met in endless horizon, and the cockpit was the only place that ever felt like home. But war had a way of shrinking the world, of trading endless blue for endless gray. On that frozen morning, Cole sat in the mess tent at a forward airstrip near Florennes, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold. Outside, engines idled. Pilots waited. And somewhere east, men were dying without air cover. He didn't know it yet, but this was the morning that would define his life. The moment between obedience and instinct, between the war as written and the war as lived. At 9:17 hours, radio chatter crackled through the mist. Reports of enemy armor near Bastogne, columns advancing faster than expected, infantry pressing hard against the 106th Division. The 354th's commanding officer, Colonel Harris, ordered all aircraft grounded. No visibility. We can't even see the treetops. The words echoed through the tent like a sentence. Cole stared at the map on the wall, red arrows pushing west through a snowstorm, blue lines folding back into themselves. The regiment pinned near Bastogne had no air cover. No artillery support. No chance. He stepped outside. The airfield was a ghost town of white and silence. Snow muffled every sound except the wind groaning through the fuselages. His P-51, Lucky Lady, waited under a thin skin of ice. She looked fragile like a bird caught in winter, silver skin dulled by frost. Cole brushed his hand along the nose cone, feeling the cold bite through his glove. "We could make it," he murmured to himself. "If we just got above the fog." He wasn't supposed to fly. But war doesn't always wait for orders. The forest below was already unraveling. Outside Bastogne, elements of the 501st Parachute Infantry and remnants of a tank destroyer unit held a shallow ridge. The snow was waist-deep, the trees black and broken by shellfire. They'd been promised support at dawn, artillery then fighters, but the sky remained blank. The men crouched low, watching German armor crawl through the valley like beasts of steel. Machine guns raked the woods. Mortars fell without warning. For every yard they gained, they lost 2 men. In the fog of that battle, there were no heroes, only survivors trying to make sense of chaos. One sergeant remembered later, "It was so quiet you could hear the tanks breathing." Another said, "We thought we'd been abandoned." But somewhere above that fog, James Cole made a decision. At 9:43 his Mustang's engine screamed to life. Mechanics shouted, waving him down. Cole didn't look back. He had half a tank of fuel, 1 loaded rack of high explosives, and visibility that barely reached the wingtips. His squadron mates would later say they thought he'd lost his nerve, that he was showing off. But what he saw, or believed he saw, was a break in the clouds to the southeast. A chance. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for clearance. He pushed the throttle forward and tore through the snowstorm. It took only 3 minutes for the world to vanish. The fog swallowed him whole, sky and ground dissolving into one gray void. Instruments iced over. His altimeter danced. For a moment he thought he was flying upside down. But through the noise and nausea came a single thought: they're down there, they're dying, and no one's coming. The Mustang broke cloud cover at less than 500 feet. Below him, a nightmare, a German armored column threading through a clearing near a small Belgian hamlet. Half hidden in the snow, American infantry were retreating across open ground. He could see their muzzle flashes, tiny sparks swallowed by smoke. He could see tanks advancing, lines of men scattering like ants under a boot. He had no orders. No backup. Just 2 bombs and a full heart of reckless fury. Cole leveled out, feeling the plane tremble under him. He flipped the arm switch for the bombs, checked his sight line through the fogged glass. "Lucky lady," he whispered, "don't fail me now." He pulled up slightly, banking low, snow streaking across his canopy like sparks on glass. The dive began shallow, then steepened, 45 degrees, 60, 70, the ground rushing up faster than thought. The wind howled through the fuselage like a living thing. At 300 feet he released both bombs. The explosion ripped the valley open. Tanks vanished in fire and mud. The blast wave tossed infantry backward, scattering them like leaves. He pulled out just above the treetops, wings shuddering, snow erupting in his wake. Smoke rose through the storm, black, twisting, violent. But it wasn't enough. There were still vehicles moving, still gunfire from the ridge. He turned back. He would later say he didn't remember the second dive. Only the sound, the roar that swallowed everything, the heartbeat that replaced fear. He came in lower this time, strafing with his .50 caliber machine guns, ripping through the lead tank, then the next. The tracers lit the snow like veins of fire. American troops saw it too, a silver streak diving through storm and smoke, impossible, unreal. One soldier shouted, "It's ours. It's ours." And for the first time in days the line held. Down below the chaos shifted. German tanks halted, unsure if they faced an air strike or a trap. Allied artillery, hearing the explosions, recalibrated on the smoke plumes. Within minutes, the ridge erupted with counterfire. What Cole had begun, one reckless act in a blizzard, became the pivot of survival. At 9:58, his radio finally caught the signal from command, "Unknown aircraft over Bastogne sector. Identify." Cole's voice came back steady, almost calm. "Lucky lady, 354th. Engaging armor near friendly positions." There was a pause, then static, then a single word, "Continue." He smiled. The storm no longer mattered. By the time he returned to base, his fuel gauge was empty. The Mustang's wings were pitted with shrapnel, its fuselage streaked with soot. Mechanics stared as he taxied in, eyes wide, jaws open. He climbed out, boots sinking into slush, and for a moment he just stood there, trembling, breath fogging the cold air. Colonel Harris approached, anger written in every step. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. Cole nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then explain yourself." Cole looked past him, toward the gray horizon where smoke still rose. "They were ours," he said quietly. "They needed someone." Harris didn't reply. He just looked at the young pilot, the frost still clinging to his jacket, the mud splashed across his flight boots, and nodded once. That afternoon, reconnaissance confirmed what no one believed. A German armored regiment had been halted outside Bastogne. The surviving American infantry, barely 200 men, reported that air support had arrived just as they were preparing to surrender. They never saw more than one plane. They never forgot what it did. No one wrote it down that day. No one told the story in the official report. But among the soldiers who lived through that morning, there was a phrase passed in the smoke and snow. "He saved us." He didn't know it yet, but that reckless dive, one man's defiance against a blizzard and an order, had just saved an entire regiment, and with it, a corner of the front that would never fall. The turning point. The fog lifted by inches, as though the sky itself were hesitating to reveal the damage. For most of the morning, the Ardennes had been wrapped in that pale gray shroud, muffling both sound and sense. But now, somewhere above the fractured front, sunlight began to push through, thin as a blade and just as sharp. From the cockpit of his battered P-51 Mustang, Second Lieutenant James R. Cole watched the light crawl across the valley below. What he saw there didn't look like victory. It looked like survival, ragged, burning, half-buried under snow. Tanks smoldered in black pools of oil. Trucks lay overturned on the forest's edge. And through the smoke he caught glimpses of men, his men, moving again. He didn't cheer. He didn't even breathe. He simply circled once, engine sputtering, eyes fixed on the shape of the battlefield he'd just torn open. Down there, somewhere among the frozen pines, an entire regiment had been given back its heartbeat. And up here, in the thinning clouds, a rookie pilot realized what it meant to live through something no one told him he could do. He turned east, climbing slowly. The radio hissed to life, a voice hoarse with static. "Lucky lady, this is Bastogne Command. Confirm ordnance expended. Identify position. Cole pressed the transmitter. Bastogne command, Lucky Lady. Expended all. Armor column neutralized. There was silence, then, repeat, confirm neutralized? He swallowed. Yes, sir. Or burning. The line clicked dead. Somewhere, officers were arguing about what to make of the report. He could imagine the scene. Men bent over maps, pointing, doubting, tracing lines that didn't yet make sense. But war doesn't always announce its turning points. Sometimes they arrive on the wings of one man acting too soon, too low, too alone. Escalation. Back at the forward airfield near Florence, the snow had thickened into sleet. Mechanics had lined the runway, staring toward the horizon like parishioners waiting for a miracle. When Cole's Mustang finally appeared, limping, trailing smoke, they broke into motion. The landing gear locked only halfway, scraping the slush as the plane skidded sideways and came to rest in a shower of ice. When the canopy popped open, Cole was shaking so hard he could barely undo the straps. His oxygen mask hung loose around his neck, his face pale and burned with frost. Colonel Harris was waiting for him. The man's greatcoat was buttoned to the throat, his expression unreadable. Get him out of there, Harris ordered, and two crewmen pulled Cole from the cockpit. He stumbled onto the frozen tarmac, boots crunching through the slush. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. Then Harris said quietly, inside. They met in the operations hut, a dim, canvas-walled room with a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. The air stank of fuel and wet wool. Maps covered every wall, littered with colored pins and grease pencil lines. Do you know what you've done? Harris asked. Yes, sir, Cole replied. His voice cracked, half from cold, half from exhaustion. I broke regulation. You broke formation, disobeyed standing order, and risked court-martial. Anything else? Cole's answer came slowly. I saved them. Harris stared for a long moment. The man's jaw worked once as though testing words he couldn't quite say. Finally, he nodded toward the map table. Show me where. Cole traced the valley with a trembling finger. Here, south of Bastogne, near a village called Neff. German armor advancing through the woods. He marked the ridge where he'd seen American infantry pinned. Then the coordinates of his strike. Harris leaned close, eyes narrowing. Those men belonged to the 501st. They reported heavy casualties, then radio silence. And now, he tapped the map. Now they report air cover. Cole said nothing. The colonel exhaled slowly. You'll write your report. You'll stand for review. But, Lieutenant? His voice softened, barely audible over the wind pressing against the canvas walls. Sometimes disobedience is all that keeps a man human out here. He turned away, leaving Cole alone with the map and the smell of smoke on his gloves. By nightfall, news had spread through the camp like a rumor carried on the wind. One Mustang stopped a regiment. Pilots spoke of it in half-joking disbelief, mechanics in quiet awe. Some called it luck, others madness. Cole called it neither. To him, it was necessity, the split-second recognition that the war on paper never matched the one in front of your eyes. He didn't sleep that night. Outside, snow hammered the tents, wind howled across the runway, and the sky glowed faintly red from the fires miles away. He sat alone, writing his report by lantern light, each line blurring into the next. Visibility poor. Engaged armored column. Expended ordnance. Return to base. At the bottom he paused. Then, in the margin, almost as an afterthought, he wrote, I saw them running. I couldn't let them die that way. He folded the paper, placed it on his bunk, and waited for dawn. Confrontation. Morning came with clearer skies, blue slicing through the ash-colored clouds. For the first time in days the air was flyable. The 354th scrambled before sunrise. Cole was not assigned to the roster. He stood at the edge of the runway watching others take off, each silver streak lifting into the light like redemption. Harris approached, clipboard under his arm. Orders came through, he said. Division wants confirmation on your strike. You'll go back, this time with a wingman. Observation only. No heroics. Cole nodded. At 7:10, Lucky Lady took to the air again, her engine repaired, her skin still scarred from shrapnel. Flying beside him was Captain Rourke, a veteran with 24 sorties under his belt and the weary calm of someone who had outlived too many friends. Keep it tight, Rourke said over the radio. Command just wants eyes. Copy that, Cole answered, though part of him already knew that wars never repeat themselves neatly. They crossed into the Bastogne sector within minutes. The valley that had been a death trap yesterday was now a graveyard, Burned armor, frozen bodies, wreckage scattered like toys left out in the snow. Smoke still coiled from the trees. But the ridge was different. Where there had been chaos, there were now trenches, movement, life. American soldiers waved from below, rifles lifted skyward in salute. Rourke's voice cracked through the static. Hell of a sight. Cole nodded, unseen. He banked gently, surveying the ground. Then something caught his eye, new tracks, fresh, cutting through the snow from the east. Armor. The Germans were regrouping, smaller units pushing toward the same position. Command, this is Lucky Lady 2, Rourke called. We've got armor moving in again. Looks like a counter-push. Advise. Static. Then, negative engagement. Hold position. Ground forces adjusting artillery. Cole stared at the columns below. He could see them clearly, 2 tanks, maybe 3, flanked by infantry. They were less than 2 miles from the ridge. Artillery would never reach them in time. Orders are to hold, Rourke reminded him. Cole didn't answer. His hand tightened on the throttle. Lieutenant. I see them, Cole cut in. If they reach that ridge, it's over. Damn it, Cole. But by then the Mustang was already diving. He didn't have bombs this time, only his 6.50 caliber guns and a half-empty fuel tank. He dropped through the clouds like a blade, the world compressing into a single point of focus, the lead tank crawling across the snow. He lined up, squeezed the trigger and felt the guns hammer through his arms. Tracers walked across the ground, sparks bursting off armor. The first tank jerked sideways, smoke pouring from its hatch. The second veered off the road, crew scattering. He pulled up, heart pounding, the sky screaming around him. God damn it, Cole. Rourke's voice tore through the radio. You're going to get us both shot down. But then ground chatter broke in, voices from Bastogne command, alive with urgency. Lucky Lady, continue run. Infantry advancing. You've got them on the run. It was chaos again, the kind that no doctrine could contain. Cole banked wide, came in for a second pass, guns raking the tree line. Explosions flowered along the ridge. The snow itself seemed to burn. Below, the 501st saw it unfold. One Mustang screaming overhead, scattering the German line, giving them the seconds they needed to regroup. For them, it was déjà vu, salvation from the sky, a silver ghost returning exactly when hope was gone. After 20 minutes, his ammunition was gone. Rourke's fuel warning light blinked red. They turned west, limping home through the thawing air. Back at base, Harris was waiting again, not angry this time, not surprised. Just silent. Observation only? He asked. Cole hesitated. They were closing fast, sir. I couldn't. I know, Harris interrupted. He looked out toward the field where mechanics swarmed over the returning planes. You ever think maybe this war runs on men like you? The ones too reckless to stay grounded? Cole didn't answer. Harris sighed. You've bought that regiment another day. Maybe more. Higher-ups are already rewriting the after-action reports. They'll call it a coordinated strike. He smirked faintly. Don't worry. I won't tell them the truth. Resolution. For the next 48 hours, the weather cleared. The Allied air forces launched wave after wave of sorties, hammering the German advance until the forest itself seemed to shudder. Cole flew every mission they gave him, escort, ground attack, reconnaissance, but none carried the same pulse as that first dive. Nothing ever would. Down below, the 501st held Bastogne. Reinforcements broke through the following week. What history would later call the turning of the Battle of the Bulge began, in part, with the small, defiant act of one pilot refusing to stay grounded. He didn't know the scale of it then. He only knew the cost. On December 23, during a routine patrol near the Meuse, Cole's plane took flak. He managed to return to base, landing with a hole through the wing and smoke trailing from the engine. When they pulled him from the cockpit, his flight suit was soaked with fuel. Harris approached quietly, holding the after-action reports from Bastogne. They're calling you the ghost over Neuf, he said. Cole laughed once, a dry, exhausted sound. I was just trying to find clear sky. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder. You found more than that, son. As the Ardennes thawed in the months that followed, soldiers from the 501st and the armored divisions that relieved them began to trade stories. None of them agreed on exactly what they saw. Some swore it was 2 planes, others said 1. Some remembered the sound, a rising shriek that broke the snow's silence. Others recalled only the flash of silver cutting through the storm. But all remembered the same feeling, that moment when death paused, when the sky opened, and when a single act of defiance gave them back their will to fight. Historians would later chart the coordinates, compare reports, assign credit to squadrons and divisions. But between the footnotes and the facts, there would always be a gap, the space where memory meets miracle. And somewhere in that space lived the truth of James R. Cole, the rookie who saw the line breaking and refused to watch it happen. On Christmas Eve, Cole sat alone beside the runway. Snow drifted down in slow spirals, catching the light from the hangar lamps. Planes slept under tarps. The world was briefly quiet again. He pulled a folded letter from his jacket, one written by a sergeant from the 501st, delivered through field channels. It said only, "You saved us. We never even saw your face. But we'll remember." He read it twice, then tucked it back into his pocket. Somewhere beyond the forest, the guns were still firing. Somewhere men were still dying. But for the first time he felt the strange, heavy peace that comes after chaos, the kind that whispers, "You did what you could." He didn't know it yet, but in the archives of that war, his name would vanish beneath bigger ones. Generals, strategists, commanders. Yet, for those who survived the ridge at Bastogne, history began the moment a reckless pilot chose sky over silence. And that, perhaps, is how wars truly turn, not with orders but with instincts that no order can contain. The legacy. Winter lingered long after the guns fell silent. By the time the thaw came to the Ardennes, the snow was no longer white, it was gray with ash, rust, and memory. In the valleys below Bastogne, along the narrow forest tracks where tanks once crawled and men once prayed, silence returned. But it was not the same silence that had existed before. It was a silence built on the weight of survival, and the absence of those who didn't. Second Lieutenant James R. Cole had not been mentioned in any of the official communiques. There was no headline, no front-page photograph. His name appeared once, misprinted, in a squadron field report, under a list titled, "Sorties Unconfirmed." Yet, in a muddy foxhole on the southern edge of the 101 Estes perimeter, men remembered. They remembered the scream of his P-47 Thunderbolt cutting through the snowstorm, the sound that meant salvation. He hadn't known it, not then, but his reckless dive had broken the line. His attack had silenced a column of German armor that was seconds from overrunning a trapped regiment. His single act, one aircraft, one run, one choice, had bought the 327th enough time to regroup and call in artillery. In the language of official dispatches, it would later be summarized in 7 words. Enemy counterattack halted. Line stabilized. Allied advance resumes. But history's summaries never carry the sound of a man's heartbeat inside a cockpit, or the look of frost on the canopy glass as dawn breaks over a battlefield. When the war finally ended, Cole was 23. He returned to a country already forgetting. America was ready for peace, for neon lights, movie theaters, and baseball again. He didn't talk much about what he'd done. To his friends he was just Jimmy, the quiet one who spent too much time staring at the sky when jets passed overhead. For a time he worked crop dusting over the flatlands of Kansas. It was a job that kept him flying low to the earth, close to the edge of danger, just how he'd learned. He married in 1949, raised 2 sons, never told them about the Ardennes. When his eldest once found his old flight jacket, Cole simply said, "That was another life." And yet, every winter he would walk out alone at dawn, when the air was cold enough to burn his lungs, and stand there facing east, as if waiting for something. Or someone. History, as the historians like to say, is written by the victors. But that isn't quite true. History is written by survivors, and edited by time. For decades, the Battle of the Bulge was told through maps and movements, generals and divisions. Eisenhower's command posts. Patton's relief of Bastogne. The freezing of the 101st. Few ever spoke of the airmen, the ones grounded for days by weather so brutal that compasses froze. When the skies finally cleared on December 23, they rose by the hundreds, flying low, strafing convoys, cutting supply lines. But among those missions, one remained undocumented. One flight that left the base against orders, through cloud and ice, guided only by instinct. Years later, an Army historian named Lieutenant Colonel Harris would stumble across the story while compiling oral testimonies from veterans of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. Again and again the soldiers mentioned it, a single plane diving through the snow, guns blazing, explosions lighting the ridgeline like thunder. The men had never seen the pilot's face. They never even knew his name. They only knew what it felt like when the sound of that engine cut through their fear. Harris spent years cross-referencing unit logs, aircraft losses, after-action reports. He never found conclusive proof. But in 1967, he wrote a note in the margin of his manuscript. If not Cole, then someone like him. One man, one act, changed everything. Some men's legacies are medals and monuments. Others live only in the breath between two moments, before destruction and after salvation. James R. Cole's story never made it to the history books, but it lived in the memories of those he saved. At reunions decades later, old men with trembling hands would talk about that day. They'd raise their glasses and say, "You remember that crazy pilot?" And someone would always answer, "He saved us." They didn't even know his name, but they remembered the sound. In 1984, long after his sons had moved away, Cole returned to Europe on a veterans tour. He stood again on the soil of the Ardennes, no longer frozen, now green and quiet. The forest had grown back, swallowing the scars of war beneath moss and wildflowers. The guide pointed out where the German columns had advanced, where the Allied line had held, where Bastogne stood unconquered. Cole said nothing. He walked a little apart from the group, down into the hollow of a field where the snow had once buried everything. There, near the remnants of an old stone wall, he knelt, gloved hand brushing against the earth. He stayed that way for a long time, until one of the younger veterans approached and asked if he was all right. Cole smiled faintly. "I used to fly over here," he said. "Once I thought I wasn't coming back." He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. The wind carried the rest of the story. He died quietly in 1991 at home, heart failure in his sleep. His obituary was brief. No mention of valor. Just World War II veteran pilot. But a year later, a letter arrived at his son's home, sent by a man named Walter Griggs, who had served with the 327th in 1944. In it he wrote, "We never knew who it was that day. But I remember the markings on the plane, the white nose stripe, the squadron insignia. I saw a photo of your father in a book. It was him. I'm sure of it. Tell him, we didn't forget." The son framed the letter. It hangs now in a small museum in Wichita, beside a faded photograph of a P-47 and a simple plaque. "He flew so others could stand." Time erases names but not echoes. Each act of courage, no matter how small, how fleeting, how lost to paperwork, ripples outward. It changes something. A regiment survives. A battle shifts. A war ends one day sooner. And the world continues quietly because one man chose to act when no one else could. Cole's dive was reckless, yes. It broke orders. It defied reason. But sometimes the line between recklessness and courage is drawn only by the result, and history judges mercy, not method. Standing on that ridge today, it's hard to imagine the chaos that once filled this silence. Birdsong replaces artillery. The forests that burn now breathe again. Yet beneath every root lies steel and ash, and beneath that, memory. Visitors walk these fields without knowing that a single aircraft once plunged through that same sky, tracing a line between death and deliverance. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of that moment still lingers, in the low hum of a distant plane, in the tremor of wind through pine trees. Some men fight wars with guns. Some with orders. Some with a single act that defies both. James R. Cole never wanted to be remembered as a hero. But maybe that's why he is one. He reminds us that history isn't just written in victories or defeats, it's written in decisions made in seconds by people who never thought anyone would notice. He reminds us that courage isn't always about surviving. Sometimes it's about making sure someone else does. And he reminds us of something simpler, older, and harder to define. That when everything falls apart, when orders fail, when plans collapse, when the sky itself seems to close, there will always be someone who chooses to dive. The historians will debate the strategies, the generals, the maps. But somewhere in every war, there is a moment like his, unseen, unrecorded, unforgettable. A heartbeat that changes everything. Some men leave behind monuments. Others leave a single echo in the snow. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the path that saves everything is the one you were never meant to take.